Police in Hong Kong charge a group of protesters putting China's new security law to the test. Hundreds were arrested as thousands took to the streets. We have a live report from Hong Kong. As virus cases climb in the U.S. tonight, the promising results in the race for a vaccine. More than a dozen are being tested in human clinical trials, and positive data has the stock jumping for one pharmaceutical company. But even if a vaccine comes soon, will enough Americans get vaccinated for it to be effective? Shutting back down, more than 40% of the country is either pausing reopening plans or reversing them just before the holiday weekend. Hospitals in Florida are overwhelmed, with medical workers saying patients are now more critical than the first wave. This as Texas reports its single biggest surge in a day, more than 8,000 cases. We take you behind the scenes of a brand new emergency ICU ward in hard-hit Dallas. Holding out hope, President Trump shares his gut feeling about how the pandemic will end.
I think that at some point that's going to sort of just disappear, I hope.
And the president also shared his feelings on a plan to paint Black Lives Matter on New York's Fifth Avenue, calling the mural a symbol of hate. The great white outdoors. As Americans seek a summer escape, we've got to look at the national park system and what's behind the racial divide among its visitors. Too big to boycott? The list of companies pulling ads from Facebook over its handling of hate speech is growing. But is the social media platform too powerful to ignore? Good evening. I'm Diane Macedo in for Lindsay Davis. Thanks for streaming with us. Celebrate at home. That's the message many local officials are sending tonight as we approach the holiday weekend. This comes as an increasing number of states are putting reopening plans on hold. California ordered many indoor retail businesses to close today. Pennsylvania mandated masks in public, and New York City paused plans to allow indoor dining, with Governor Cuomo pointing to the, quote, storm clouds on the horizon elsewhere. Those clouds are especially dark in some states. In Florida tonight, nurses tell us if things don't change in 2 weeks, who knows where we'll be. Tonight, though, there's a glimmer of hope from the scientific world. Positive early results on a vaccine trial. Our Eva Pilgrim leads us off with the new developments.
Tonight, new hope in the urgent race for a coronavirus vaccine. Pfizer today announcing promising results from early trials.
Our first vaccine candidate is eliciting antibody levels to neutralize the virus that is equivalent to or better than what you see in people who have had COVID-19.
The World Health Organization's latest report shows 17 potential vaccines in human trials, 132 in preclinical phases. The frontrunners, according to the WHO, Oxford AstraZeneca in the UK, CanSino in China, and Moderna here in the U.S. Oxford, the furthest along, now in phase 3, enlisting more than 10,000 volunteers. If found to be safe and effective, emergency doses of Oxford's vaccine could be ready by October. In China, CanSino given the green light for military use. And here in the U.S., biotech company Moderna is set to begin phase 3 human trials in collaboration with the National Institute of Health this month with 30,000 volunteers. If successful, hoping to have doses ready by early 2021. While the progress so far looks promising, success isn't a guarantee. And experts warn the vaccines themselves aren't the only issue.
Developing safe and effective vaccines isn't the only challenge. We need to have enough supply and potentially hundreds of millions of Americans willing to get vaccinated in order to achieve herd immunity.
And doctors say it's key for companies to test large numbers of people, both old and young, to prove the vaccine is safe and effective.
If we sort of cut corners on those things, I don't think we're going to create the confidence people need. So I think we can get there, but we're going to have to do it. We're going to have to do it right.
And Eva Pilgrim joins us now from New York. Eva, the FDA released some new guidance. So what will it take for a coronavirus vaccine to actually win approval?
So the FDA has said that if researchers can prove that a vaccine is safe and at least 50% effective, they will likely approve it for use, Diane.
And considering today's development with Pfizer, what's the next step for them? And if all goes well here, when does the company hope to have a vaccine on the market?
So this data that Pfizer put out today is company-provided data. It hasn't been peer-reviewed yet. They are waiting at this point for the green light to move into the next phase of trials, larger trials. They're hoping that that can begin as early as later this month with as many as 30,000 volunteers participating. But their goal all along has remained the same. They're hoping to have a safe vaccine by 2021. Diane?
All right, 2021. Fingers crossed. Eva Pilgrim from New York. Thanks, Eva. And now to some of the discouraging signs around the country. In California, more than 9,700 new cases were reported today. The governor is ordering new restrictions affecting 70% of the state's population, and hospitals say they are reaching full capacity. Our chief national correspondent, Matt Gutman, has more.
Tonight, with cases in California nearing 250,000, the governor closing down parts of the state and enforcing it.
We have, I think, a responsibility at the same time to go after people that are thumbing their nose. The bottom line is the spread of this virus continues at a rate that is particularly concerning.
Effective immediately, bars, indoor dining, museums, wineries, movie theaters shut down in 19 counties, including Los Angeles. And a grim new milestone in California, nearly 10,000 cases in just 24 hours. In Riverside County, where ICUs are at 90% capacity, nurses on a 10-day strike, demanding more staff and PPE. And so many of the nurses here have lost patients to COVID.
With a matter of hours, they're gone. You got to act fast, and you need to have the proper staff to help out. Yeah.
The hospital says it follows CDC guidelines, but COVID has killed 2 of its staff, including Sally Lara, a 62-year-old grandmother of 8 who came out of retirement to work through the pandemic.
We've known these people. We spend holidays with them. You know, we spend birthdays with them. And it's hard. It's hard. We want to do the job that we signed up for.
Across 25 states, hospitalizations increasing. In Florida, more than half the patients are under 35. This college student got COVID after a night out with friends.
We sit at a table, like just us, like we'll be fine, like we'll get a drink. To my fellow college students or anybody around our age, my best way to put it is it's not worth it. Stay home.
Today, a record 8,000 cases in Texas. The state resisted locking down, then reopened quickly, something Dr. Anthony Fauci has consistently warned against. But the lieutenant governor now downplaying the state's 2,400 deaths and instead targeting Fauci.
He has been wrong every time on every issue. I don't need his advice anymore. We'll listen to a lot of science, we'll listen to a lot of doctors, and Governor Abbott, myself, and other state leaders will make the decision. No thank you, Dr. Fauci.
First temperature check. We get our temperatures checked about 3 times a day.
But at Parkland Hospital in Dallas, where they've had to open a 3rd COVID area, one doctor telling our Marcus Moore he's facing agonizing decisions.
Now I'm having to choose and have conversations about which patients I'm supposed to take care of. Which patients I can't take care of because I got to take care of other patients. I can't even believe I'm having that conversation.
At least 20 states are now pausing or rolling back reopening. New York City slamming the brakes on plans for indoor dining next week.
Even a week ago, honestly, I was hopeful we could, but the news we have gotten from around the country gets worse and worse all the time.
And just outside the city, a cluster of at least 8 cases linked to a house party. Mainly young adults in their 20s, some of them facing $2,000 fines after contact tracers got these kinds of responses.
I don't have to speak with you. Don't call me again. I will not tell you anything.
And our Matt Gutman joins us now from Southern California, where we heard earlier from the governor about some new restriction plans. Matt, at a time when people are really trying to get out, how will these renewed measures be enforced?
Well, the governor is talking about reprioritizing aggressive enforcement. He's talking about strike teams. You're not going to see posses or squads of armed cops patrolling the streets, pulling people's, making sure that they have their mask on. But what you are going to see is a much more coordinated effort by California state agencies, the Highway Patrol, the Consumer Affairs Department, and they are going to go out and investigate businesses that they've had complaints about.
And if they deem necessary, they will strip them of their licenses. That's a big deal for those businesses. In addition to that, they're going to go after counties if they are non-compliant. It's already written into the state budget that if these counties are found to be non-compliant, they could lose state funding. And for many of these counties, that could be in the billions of dollars. So this is not to be taken lightly right now. And unfortunately, for all those people who want to get out, want to go back to the restaurants and bars, in California, at least in many other states, they're probably going to have to wait a little bit longer. Diane?
All right, Matt Gutman, live from California. Thanks, Matt. And in parts of Texas, COVID infections continued to push ICUs to their limit. Just this week in Dallas, Parkland Hospital opened a third ICU ward to deal with the crisis. Our producer Jim Schultz and photojournalist Juan Renteria spent time with the doctors and nurses from the medical center who spoke out about what they are seeing on the front lines.
I think what's hard about it is you never know what to expect. Every day is a little different. It's always busy.
You know, to give you an idea, 4 weeks ago, I had about 50 patients admitted in my hospital. Now we're over 110. We're definitely going the wrong direction.
I just worry that what's to come 2-3 weeks from now.
My gut tells me we're not at the end. We're kind of at the beginning.
Testing effort continues in Dallas.
Just pulled up to Parkland. It's about 6 o'clock. We're here, just finishing up some coffee, about to head on in.
You know, coming into this unit was scary, but within the first few weeks, we all have felt very safe.
Here's all the masks. So we all pick up our scrubs. We've got some booties and hairnets. We get our shield and our mask. Ready to go.
You know, they've put safety at the front of everything. The process to get in and out is, you know, very rigorous. There's people watching us at all times to make sure that it's done correctly. And I think it's kind of proven by the lack of people that have gotten sick, you know, in the staff, that, you know, we are safe and we are protected.
Our temperature before we go in, sign in. Let's enter. Let's enter the red door.
At first, I think we were all somewhat fearful going into the unit, not knowing what to expect, this new disease. But every day that you're in there, it gets easier. Sure, it's long hours, but honestly, I feel safer in there with the proper PPE that Parkland has supplied, and I feel safer in there than I do anywhere else.
First temperature check. We get our temperatures checked about 3 times a day.
We have a specialized COVID ward. We created what we called our tactical care unit here. We're very proud of our results here, but we've outgrown it. We've had to open another ward. And then yesterday we had to open a third.
We never expected doing anything like this. This is unlike anything any other day of work has ever been. But, you know, it's been a cool thing to be able to be a part of and to be able to be hands-on and, you know, really helping these patients who really don't have anyone else, you know, helping them there in the hospital without family. And so I'm glad that I can be there for them in those times.
Every day kind of blends into the next day, if you will. There are some days where we'll have codes or we'll have patients that just get really bad really quickly, and those days are harder than others.
These patients who are spending their last days, their last, you know, weeks, months in the hospital without family, without, you know, any support from their loved ones is so hard. And I think that's what makes it really hard on us, but also rewarding, because we know that, you know, the family can see us we do Zoom calls with them, talk to them on the phone, all those kind of things, and to be able to show them that we're there, we're holding their hand, we are with them at all times, even if it's the end of times for them. But you know, they're not alone. We are there, but it is really hard not to have their family there.
I wanted to show you guys the family visiting area. Of course, family can't come into the units, but we do have an area that at night, when you can see into the windows, there is a garden out here that family can go. And if the patients are able to walk up to the window, they are able to wave and, you know, see their family. Although we try to have them see each other on Zoom, it's kind of nice to be able to see them in person.
I wish people could see both people that are about to be intubated, but even before that, when people are just in a little bit of distress from breathing, just the fear in patients' eyes, it's hard to take in. Just looking at them, you can tell that they're just so fearful. They don't know if they're going to see their family again. You can only imagine what they're thinking. All right, so it's the end of the day. I finished my notes and called the families of some patients of mine to give them updates about their loved one. And 5 of my patients are going to be able to sleep in their own bed tonight, which is incredible. They were able to go ahead and get discharged. And looking at our admission list, though, there's already over a dozen patients being admitted because of their COVID-related illness.
But how can we slow this down? Guys, wear your masks. Wash your hands. It's those things that we have science on. This is not in dispute. We know these things for facts.
You know, gasping for air throughout the entire day is not a comfortable feeling, and it is very distressful. And I think it feels like you're about to die all the time.
Wearing the mask is not just for yourself, and you know, it's really for everybody.
All right, just finished day 205. Ready to go home, take all this PPE off, and I'll be back again tomorrow morning.
And a big thank you to all of our healthcare workers risking their own lives to care for so many there on the front lines. Now let's go over to Washington, where President Trump again doubled down on the notion that the coronavirus will, quote, just disappear. The president is also digging in on culture wars over Confederate statues and the Black Lives Matter movement. ABC News Chief White House correspondent Jonathan Karl is at the White House with the latest.
A day after Dr. Anthony Fauci warned the U.S. could soon see 100,000 new coronavirus cases a day, President Trump predicted the virus will soon, quote, sort of just disappear.
I think we're going to be very good with the coronavirus. I think that at some point that's going to sort of just disappear, I hope.
You still believe so? Disappear?
Well, I do. Yeah, sure, at some point.
Republican leaders in Congress are now joining the chorus of voices urging the president to set an example by wearing a mask. But he has recently suggested wearing a mask is politically incorrect, calling it a, quote, double-edged sword. Today, he was asked about it in an interview with Fox Business.
But I'm all for masks. I think masks are good. I would wear, if I were in a group of people and I was close.
You would wear one?
Oh, I would. Oh, I have. I mean, people have seen me wearing one.
Do you think the public will see that at some point?
Oh, I have no problem with that. I think, and if people feel good about it, they should do it.
As new infections have surged across much of the country, the president has largely stayed silent on the pandemic, instead using his Twitter feed to defend Confederate monuments and sending racially divisive messages. Today, he blasted a plan by the mayor of New York to paint the words Black Lives Matter on Fifth Avenue in front of Trump Tower.
Maybe seeing it outside his doorstep will help him get the point.
The president hit back in a tweet calling Black Lives Matter a, quote, symbol of hate. The president also spoke today on reports of intelligence indicating the Russian government paid bounties for the deaths of U.S. troops in Afghanistan.
From what I hear, and I hear it pretty good, the intelligence people many of them didn't believe it happened at all. I think it's a hoax.
But his own national security team is not calling it a hoax, and neither are Republicans in Congress.
And John Karl joins me now from Washington. John, let's go back to the president's response on the coronavirus. He's been relatively quiet in the last few days as cases have surged. So any sense of how the White House is trying to contain this new spread of the virus?
He's been incredibly quiet. He has not been attending coronavirus task force meetings for some time. He's basically completely outsourced that to Vice President Pence, who has been out there talking about this. But in answer to your question about what kind of a response to contain the virus, I don't get the sense that there is anything in the works in terms of a new federal response. The line that we're hearing from the Vice President is that the state officials are the ones that are taking the lead on this. They have support from the federal government. But I really don't get the sense that we're getting anywhere near back to what we saw back in March when they unveiled that effort to control the spread, flatten the curve. No new federal intervention here, and certainly nothing from the president himself.
And John, you mentioned in your piece, at least on Twitter, the president seems more focused on culture wars, so to speak. So I know you wrote a piece in The Atlantic with the headline, "The Second Battle of Charlottesville," and you talk about this moment in his presidency and him enacting the lessons that he took from that experience. Can you explain how the president is enacting lessons from 2017?
Well, Charlottesville was really the previous, before 2020, I think the low point of the Trump presidency. The nation was horrified to see white supremacists, neo-Nazis marching. You remember they were carrying tiki torches there at the University of Virginia, chanting the words, "Jews will not replace us." They were protesting the removal of the Confederate statues. Some of the protesters doing that had Nazi flags, Nazi insignia. It was something that truly shocked the nation, and one of those white supremacists drove his car into a group of counter-protesters and actually killed 32-year-old Heather Heyer. And back then, the president made some initial remarks, but did not specifically denounce white supremacists. In fact, he suggested there were bad people on both sides of the protests. His advisors urged him, practically pleaded with him, to come out the following day to make a more forceful statement that he would specifically denounce white supremacists and utter some words of unity. He actually did that. It was a teleprompter speech. When he saw the way the speech was received immediately after, he yelled at his advisors in words that I can't use here on television, even in digital, and said he would never do it again. The next day is when he uttered those infamous words that there were very fine people on both sides of the protest, including, by extension, very fine people marching with the neo-Nazis and the white supremacists. The lessons he learned from there were never back down, never be browbeaten into giving words of reconciliation, and he really hasn't done it this time, after once again the nation has been horrified by what they have seen, in this case by the killing of George Floyd.
All right, our Jonathan Karl there from Washington. We appreciate it, Jonathan. Thanks.
Thanks, Diane.
The House has unanimously approved an extension to the small business loan program known as PPP through August 8th. This means small businesses impacted by COVID will still be able to apply for loans and grants. $130 billion remained in the fund, which was originally set to expire last night. But in a surprise move, the Senate voted late last night to approve the extension. The bill now heads to the president's desk for his signature. And tonight, the White House is declaring Seattle liberated after police moved in to clear out the so-called chop zone in that city. Dozens of protesters who were occupying the area for weeks were arrested, while here in New York, police clashed with demonstrators trying to set up their own autonomous zone. ABC's Janae Norman has the latest.
Oh my God. Tonight, officers in riot gear swarming Seattle's occupied protest zone. Clashing with protesters as they cleared out tents, arresting more than 30 people. More than 3 weeks after protesters seized the 6-block area. Police reclaiming their precinct in the area that saw crime skyrocket by more than 500% and 2 teens fatally shot. Protesters blocking police from responding to at least one of those deadly incidents.
Our job is to support peaceful demonstrations, but what has happened here on these streets is lawless and it's brutal, and bottom line, it is simply unacceptable.
Across the country, police in New York City moving in on demonstrators calling to defund the police. Captured in this dailymail.com video, those protesters camped out by City Hall for more than a week. Hours earlier, the city's council voting to slash the NYPD's budget by $1 billion.
I wanted us to go deeper. I wanted us to take larger headcount reductions. I wanted a true hiring freeze. This is the beginning.
But the shootings in the city up by 40% from this time last year. The NYPD commissioner warning this is not the answer.
The city council bowed to mob rule. And let's mark the date on the calendar and how long it's going to be before we're having a conversation about New Yorkers crying out for more police.
And our Janae Norman joins us now from downtown New York City. Janae, clearly the NYPD is not happy about this move, but what's the reaction been among people who've been calling for this change? Is this what they were looking for?
Well, Diane, it's important to point out that these cuts do not include layoffs of current officers. So some people are saying that the cuts don't go far enough, but rather just shift officers to different agencies. And you can still see this big encampment behind me. There's a sign over my shoulder that reads, "Abolish the police." Many of the protesters here feel like those cuts don't go enough, even though they did slash the NYPD's budget by $1 billion. Diane?
All right, the debate continues. Janae Norman, our thanks to you. And when we come back, the wedding photos one California couple will never forget after this mishap. They were finally pulled to safety. And the deepening mystery in the search for a missing Fort Hood soldier. One suspect took his own life and another is in custody after human remains found. We'll also take you to Hong Kong, where protesters made their voices heard after a major security crackdown. But first, our national parks are for everyone, but new research is revealing that most ethnic groups don't visit them. Why is that? Stay with us. Welcome back. America's national parks and public lands have long been places of refuge in times of turmoil. But new government data first shared with ABC News shows people of color are less likely to take advantage of the great outdoors. Our Devin Dwyer takes a look at why that is and why it's so important for our collective health and the future of the parks themselves.
The sweeping vistas stir the soul. Wildlife and waterfalls awaken a sense of wonder. The American wilderness, a playground for old and for young, and overwhelmingly white.
When you look around, you don't see people that you identify with. You don't feel welcome. You feel out of place. You feel literally like you are an outsider.
Ambreen Tarek is founder of Brown People Camping. When she was 8 years old, her family moved from India to Minnesota, where she fell in love with the outdoors. 20 years later, she's still astonished not to see more people like her.
Some people might say, isn't this just that people of color don't like to camp?
Yeah. And to that, I would say, no, right? That's a generalization. And just because something isn't happening or the presence of someone is missing does not mean they don't want to be there.
To many Americans of color, parks, campgrounds, and forest land are stubborn bastions of self-segregation.
After 12,500 miles, 15 national parks, and untold state parks, I saw 2 black people. She said she saw 4.
I saw 4.
That was 1995 when Frank and Audrey Peterman took their first road trip to explore the nation's natural wonders. The history of America's wilderness loomed large.
Historically, in the South in particular, many atrocious things that happened to black people in the woods.
Racism was a factor at the founding of America's national parks, created in part to be an escape for white urban elites. Several were racially segregated into the 1950s, many considered uninviting to people of color into the 1990s.
We have an inherent fear, we do, because of our history, about going into these remote, rural places where we're not sure that will be accepted.
Lauren Gay, the self-described outdoorsy diva, blogs about her experiences as a woman of color in the wilderness.
So when you don't see it in marketing and advertising, for one, in the psyche, you don't necessarily think this is something that's for me.
We have to be responsive to those needs.
The National Park Service says the persistent whiteness of its 419 parks is an existential crisis. David Vela is the first Latino to lead the agency.
Do you think the parks are affected by systemic racism?
I think that as a person of color, I think that our national parks and what I've found, they're places where we can learn more about what happened in the past. because that reflects our thinking today.
In a report first shared with ABC News, the Park Service finds 77% of its visitors are white. Just 23% are people of color. Racial minorities make up 42% of the U.S. population.
What's the biggest factor behind the disparity?
I think it's going to vary among communities of color. The lack of transportation opportunities is clearly going to be a factor. But what a lot of folks don't understand is that we're closer than what you think, especially in the urban areas.
The national parks have tried marketing to minority communities with ads like these, training staff on sensitivity and hiring more rangers from diverse backgrounds. Less than 20% of the 20,000 Park Service employees are non-white.
You need to have that cultural diversity reflected on both sides of the visitor center desk, at the entrance station, at the campgrounds.
Ranger Shelton Johnson has pushed diversity in the parks for 20 years, teaching countless visitors to Yosemite in California about the Buffalo Soldiers, the African Americans who helped protect park land a century ago.
That has a profound impact because they're not expecting that story at all.
Black people in Yosemite, black people in Yosemite, we have arrived.
I think that's just wonderful.
In 2010, his outreach got a boost when Oprah Winfrey wanted to go camping.
I just said to myself, you know what? That would be powerful if the world's biggest celebrity, who's African American, issued the invitation to the African American community that I always dreamed of when I was a kid.
Do you think it had an impact?
It was Oprah. Next question. Of course it had an impact.
But many say progress is still not happening quickly enough.
If we don't address this and we don't see how all these things are interrelated, then we're going to risk losing everything. We're not going to have public lands to enjoy.
Groups like the Sierra Club have begun education campaigns within minority communities to promote access to nature and its physical and mental health benefits.
If we look at it from a humanitarian perspective, these are matters of life and death for some people. We need to have a conversation about how are people getting outdoors and connecting with nature where they live, in their neighborhoods. What all the recent events with George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, the Central Park incident are shining a light on black people in particular, but other people of color don't have that freedom to have that experience.
You're worried about somebody calling the police on you. You're worried about just having a negative interaction based solely on the color of your skin.
Danielle Williams, a fourth-generation U.S. Army veteran and outdoor advocate, says racial profiling and stereotyping remain major concerns.
A lot of us, we've been saying the same message over and over for years, and for some people longer, but people haven't necessarily been listening.
Protests for racial equality after the death of George Floyd last month give Williams hope that attitudes can change. She says in the outdoors, it means openness to camping options beyond backpacks and tents.
We have to kind of tone down the elitism and just think about our language when we talk about the outdoors, because car camping, that's great, right? Camping in your backyard, if you live in a single-family home, that's also wonderful.
The survival of our national parks may depend on those families and their interest in spending time there. The census projects people of color will be a majority in America by 2044, a demographic shift that will impact park attendance and finances.
If we don't make ourselves relevant to current and future generations, who is going to be the advocates for the protection and preservation of our nation's public lands? And who's going to wear these uniforms? Our values aren't going to change, but how we do business has to.
Advocates say allies of people of color have a big part to play.
What can I do as a white person to be more welcoming to somebody of color?
There are the most basic things you can do. One of the things I always talk about is when you see someone, smile and say hi.
Treat us as you would any other person that you see. You know, try really hard to swallow that question of, oh, well, what brings you here? Well, the same thing that brings you here.
The Petermans say progress is possible.
There's been a tremendous improvement, and it's largely coming from inside our communities.
After visits to 185 parks in 47 states, they're optimistic more families of color will be joining them in the outdoors.
They tell the story of the evolution of America. So if you want to know that story, and now there's so much confusion about the real American story, you will find them in the national parks.
For ABC News Live, I'm Devin Dwyer in Rock Creek Park.
Still ahead on ABC News Prime, we are tracking the flood threat in the nation's midsection and a heat wave for large swaths of the country. Plus, a federal judge strikes down a Trump administration rule preventing Central Americans from seeking asylum at our southern border. But there's news tonight on who is now doing most of the border crossings. First, our tweet of the day, one of the best or worst deals ever in sports history, depending on how you look at it. Now to immigration. A federal judge today struck down a Trump administration rule that largely prevented Central Americans from seeking asylum at the southern border. This as a new poll finds that many Americans want more, not less, immigration to the U.S. We take a closer look by the numbers. 34% of Americans want immigration to the U.S. increased, compared to only 28% who want immigration decreased, according to Gallup. This is the first time in the poll's 55-year history that Americans who favor more immigration outnumber those wanting less. The Trump administration has been restricting green cards and visas. Now the Citizenship and Immigration Services says it will furlough nearly 70% of its staff unless it gets more funding. This further backlogs the legal immigration system. Unauthorized border crossings are also down. 21,475 were recorded in May, a fraction of the 144,116 in May of 2019. The administration is sending most border crossers back, 19,707 in May, under its controversial fast-track deportation policy. And finally, we're seeing a shift in demographics. 82% of migrants apprehended at the southern border are Mexican nationals. Last year, the majority came from Central America. Still to come, the deepening mystery in the search for a missing Fort Hood soldier after one suspect takes his own life while another is in custody. Also, an update on the Elijah Maclean investigation in Colorado, what the FBI is now looking into. And the ad boycott directed at some of the hate speech on Facebook continues. But what is the end goal, and what can the social media giant do? First, here are some trending stories on abcnews.com.
More than 40,000 Americans tested positive for coronavirus in the past 24 hours. And in 14 states, new cases along with hospitalizations and deaths are also on the rise. They include California, where the governor announced new closures for indoor businesses in 19 counties.
If you're not going to stay home and you're not going to wear masks in public, we have to enforce, and we will.
Florida Governor Ron DeSantis cautioned people gathering in large numbers, but has not put further restrictions on businesses or beaches.
You know, doing things outdoors in Florida is less risky than doing things where you're packed indoors.
New York City's mayor announcing indoor dining is being postponed indefinitely to make sure cases don't rise in what was the epicenter of the country's outbreak.
We cannot go ahead at this point in time with indoor dining in New York City. Look, even a week ago, honestly, I was hopeful we could, but the news we have gotten from around the country gets worse and worse all the time.
In Seattle, authorities have retaken the protest-occupied zone known as CHOP, police dispersing demonstrators weeks after they took over, calling for police reforms.
Our job is to support peaceful demonstrations, but what has happened here on these streets over the last few weeks that is lawless and it's brutal, and bottom line, it is simply unacceptable.
Officers also made several arrests.
This afternoon, the Mississippi state flag with the Confederate battle emblem lowered for the last time at the state capitol.
Major League Baseball players begin training camp today ahead of a July 23rd start to the season.
Baseball players will be tested regularly for COVID-19, and there are guidelines for social distancing among players and staff in dugouts, bullpens, and clubhouses. But Major League Baseball is not restricting player movements outside of the ballpark.
It's July 1st, and there hasn't been baseball, so I've really been itching for it.
The league says players who test positive for COVID-19 will be placed on an injured list, but the team will not identify the players who test positive.
Another day of summer severe weather, widespread. Like, take a look at the radar from Maine all the way to Mississippi, deep into Texas. We've got some thunderstorms that have produced some big winds, 60 miles per hour in Virginia, and that line moving through Tennessee. That's got some heavy rain, flooding rain with it. Where it's not raining, it's hot. We've got warnings in Tulsa and advisories from Dallas to Shreveport to New Orleans tomorrow, and that heat expands into the holiday weekends. We could see 90s coast to coast in some of the major cities through the 4th of July.
And the wedding photos one California couple will never forget. The bride and groom taking pictures in their wedding outfits on the rocks in Orange County when the surf washed into the ocean. Lifeguards coming to the rescue. The bride pulled to safety in her wedding dress. We hear everyone's okay.
Heading overseas to Hong Kong now, where critics say a sweeping new security law imposed by Beijing is targeting Hong Kong's protesters. Demonstrators still took to the streets in the last 24 hours despite that new law and the threat of arrest. But some are now questioning, is this the beginning of the end of democracy in Hong Kong? Britt Clennett is on the ground there with the latest. Britt?
The heart of Hong Kong's shopping district. Riot police gathering in numbers.
At the moment, there aren't any protesters. We're just seeing this incredibly heavy police presence. As far as the eye can see, that way, they've cornered off, that way over there. They really aren't willing to let these protesters go anywhere near this area.
Soon, we're also forced out of the area. Tension returning to Hong Kong streets following the abrupt introduction of a new national security law overnight. The law targets alleged subversion, succession, terrorism and collusion with foreign forces. Beijing says it's necessary to stop the unrest, but activists say it signals the end of the one country, two systems framework, which is meant to give Hong Kong a degree of autonomy. The new law is very much designed to stop scenes of protest like this. But it seems the law hasn't yet had the deterrent effect Beijing had hoped for, as thousands turned out in defiance of the law anyway.
You felt compelled to come out today?
Yeah. Because we don't have anything left. Yeah.
What do you think is going to happen, though? I mean, this law is enforced now. Is it time to kind of give up the fight and get back to normal in Hong Kong? Because that's what's being said.
How does any democracy come up in any city in the world, in any country in the world, if people all gave up?
Yet Hong Kong police didn't waste time making its first batch of arrests under the new law.
Just saw the police moving forward. Protesters retreat, and again another protester down on the ground being pinned to the floor. It looks like he's been arrested.
A new purple flag warns protesters that under the new law, carrying banners that call for independence is banned. Several did it anyway.
This sticker calling for Hong Kong independence, as well as the slogans we've been hearing calling for independence, is absolutely illegal. This could land you in jail.
As tensions escalated throughout the day, reports came in that a policeman had been stabbed. A journalist was knocked down by water cannon, and tear gas was used to disperse protesters.
Cheers!
In what might as well have been a world away, officials hosted the 23rd anniversary of Hong Kong's handover from Britain to Chinese rule. The controversial law, as one top Chinese official in Beijing described it, was the central government's birthday gift to the city. Hong Kong leader Carrie Lam once again stepped out in defense of the law.
We could think of no valid reason why China alone should be inhibited from enacting national security legislation to protect every corner of its territory and all of its nationals.
But the international community isn't buying it. The legislation drawing instant condemnation.
Free Hong Kong was one of the world's most stable, prosperous, and dynamic cities. Now it will be just another communist-run city where its people will be subject to the party elite's whims.
The enactment and imposition of this national security law constitutes a clear and serious breach of the Sino-British Joint Declaration.
Britain, Hong Kong's former colonial ruler, is now offering a pathway to British citizenship for millions in Hong Kong. But with China appearing steadfast on its influence over Hong Kong and one part of the law criminalising collusion with foreign forces, it's not clear how much impact global condemnation will actually have.
And Britt Clennett joins me now from Hong Kong. Britt, first, let me take a quick moment to officially welcome you to ABC News. We're so happy to have you on the team.
Thanks very much.
So talk to me a little bit about what you're seeing there. It's been over 24 hours since this new security law went into effect there. What kind of an impact does it seem to be having on the scope of these protests or the arrests that you're seeing?
Well, Diane, the interesting thing is that there's no protest planned for today, but with anger boiling, like you saw in that piece before, we're likely to see protests in the coming weeks. Let's not forget there are still coronavirus restrictions here in Hong Kong, and yet we saw those scenes yesterday. What we can say is that there has been some retreat from activists, but definitely, some reporting to have fled to Taiwan. Others have completely deleted their social media presence. But from what we've seen in the last 24 hours, there is still a sizable group willing to stand up to China. Joshua Wong, a very prominent activist, says that his political group, Demosisto, was disbanded to protect its members and that he would continue the fight and stay in Hong Kong.
And how are the residents there reacting to the possibility of losing Hong Kong's autonomy from China, what it currently has?
Well, Diane, a lot of people we spoke to yesterday were extremely worried, but it's not just residents and activists here who are concerned about this law. The whole legal sector has cried foul over this. Certainly journalists, artists, even members of the business community are considering moving their companies elsewhere in Asia. Let's not forget, up until recently, this was considered one of the freest cities in Asia. So it's been quite a dramatic turn.
And you're talking about companies potentially leaving. You talked in your piece about Britain offering a path to citizenship to go over there, too. Does it seem like the people in Hong Kong could leave en masse if this happens, or do they seem determined to stay and fight?
I think there's two different camps here. There's certainly indications that some are looking to move abroad, maybe Taiwan, maybe Canada, and certainly people who have British overseas national passports are weighing up that option as well. But, like I say, we have spoken to people who say they will stay in Hong Kong, they will fight on Hong Kong soil, whatever it takes.
All right, Britt Clennett there from Hong Kong. Britt, welcome to the team. Thank you. And we're learning tonight that the FBI is reviewing the Elijah Maclean case for a possible civil rights violation. You might remember the 23-year-old was walking home last August when he was confronted by police, seen here on body cam. Officers placed him in a chokehold before EMTs then injected him with ketamine. Maclean had a heart attack in the ambulance and died a few days later. His family says he was wearing a ski mask due to a blood condition. In the video, you can hear Elijah tell police, "I can't breathe." And now to the ongoing search for a missing Fort Hood soldier. Authorities now say one suspect in the case killed himself after being confronted by police, and a second suspect is now in custody. And all of this comes a day after investigators found human remains. Adrian Bankert has that story.
Tonight, the heartbroken family of Fort Hood soldier Vanessa Guillen demanding justice for the 20-year-old who's been missing since April.
And I want justice! And I want answers! My family does not deserve this! Vanessa Guillen did not deserve this!
The Army reveals one military suspect in Guillen's disappearance. A junior soldier, also from Fort Hood, killed himself early this morning as authorities were closing in.
As officers attempted to make contact with the suspect, he produced a weapon and committed suicide by shooting himself.
The Army also arresting a second suspect, a civilian woman and estranged wife of a former soldier. And the military is not yet releasing the names of those suspects. Also, identification is still pending on the partial human remains found in Bell County, Texas on Tuesday. But today, at a news conference in Washington, D.C., Guillen's distraught family is adamant that the remains belong to Guillen, who was last seen in a Fort Hood parking lot on April 22nd.
It's not confirmed yet whether it's my sister or not, but at this point, everything points to it.
They say before she went missing, Guillen told them she had been sexually harassed by a superior, but didn't report the incident out of fear of retribution. The Army said it's investigating those claims. Guillen's family criticizing the Army for taking too long to act on her disappearance.
She signed that contract with the Army to protect and serve the country. Yet look how they treated her. Like if it was she was nothing.
Our thanks to Adrian Bankert for that report. We turn now to Facebook and the growing list of companies that have vowed to stop advertising on the platform over how it handles hate speech and other content that they consider harmful. Over 500 companies worldwide, including big brands like Coca-Cola, Unilever, and Pfizer, have joined the Stop Hate for Profit campaign to temporarily boycott the social media giant. Celebrities like Prince Harry and Meghan Markle have also joined that call. Facebook says it invests billions of dollars each year to keep its community safe, has banned 250 white supremacist organizations from its platforms, agreed to an audit, and through AI finds 90% of hate speech even before users report it. But Facebook also says it, quote, has more work to do. For more on the issue, we bring in Yael Eisenstadt, a visiting fellow at Cornell Tech's Digital Life Initiative and Facebook's former head of elections integrity. Yael, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Why do you think these companies are boycotting Facebook, and do you think that Facebook is doing enough to combat hate speech?
So it's actually really great to see so many companies stand up with their dollars and say that they're not going to tolerate this anymore. The boycott, listen, the boycott's not going to solve everything. There's a whole myriad of issues related to how social media platforms operate, how they monetize, how speech occurs on their platforms. That said, when a lot of activists and academics and even employees in Facebook have been speaking out for a while now, for the last few years, about some of these issues. But the real way to make Facebook change, unfortunately, there's really two ways. And one is by hurting the profit, and one is by threats of regulation. So seeing these companies stand up and say, we don't want our ads running next to hate speech, we don't believe the platform's doing enough to really protect society from some of the most dangerous things that are happening on your platform is, I think, a really great step. But is Facebook doing enough? It's really, it's a big situation. There's right now, in response, Mark Zuckerberg made an announcement on Friday on some of the changes they're going to make, and some of them are important, but they're very reactive, right? They're the things that they can do now, sort of the whack-a-mole. What content should they take down? What should they do about certain speech from certain people? What they're never really addressing is the really systemic issues of why their platform is so ripe to be exploited and manipulated by bad actors, by extremist groups, by people who want to interfere in our elections. And those are the harder things that many people have been asking Facebook to step up and do that they haven't really tackled as much.
So, yeah, having worked at the company, how do they go about doing that? How does a company with billions of users go about regulating some of the speech had on the platform? And do you see any problems with Facebook going out and doing that?
Yeah, I mean, there's no question it's an extraordinarily complicated situation, because the one thing I do agree with Mark Zuckerberg is I don't want him to be the arbiter of truth, right? It is a very, I will give Facebook credit where credit's due. This is not an easy problem. Understanding what is actually, so for me, for example, that some of the content that raised a lot of the issues a few weeks ago was also around the president talking about mail-in ballots. It's not just hate speech. It was, is this a voter suppression tactic? Is he trying to interfere in the trust of our elections? These are really complicated questions. That said, there are some very clear ones that Facebook could have done a much better job of tackling, and not only doing so in reaction. And for example, like, let's look at this group. There's this hate group. They're called the Boogaloo Boys. You know, people have been trying to highlight to Facebook for a while that these guys were not only on their platform, but were really spreading hate. And then what happened was two of them they met in a Facebook group. They met in a hate group on Facebook, and then they went and they killed a federal officer, in Oakland during the Black Lives Matter protest. So these are really serious matters. And yes, it is complicated with almost 3 billion people communicating on the platform to figure out how to regulate each piece of speech. That said, what I'm more concerned about, and a lot of people are more concerned about, is, are you amplifying this speech? Are you recommending these hate groups to people? Did these people get in the Boogaloo groups because it's what they were looking for? Or is it because you recommended the group to them? These are the bigger questions that really are contributing to this really dangerous situation that many people are really trying to hold the company accountable for.
So it sounds like they'll have to take a deeper look at their algorithms and how they make those recommendations. But I also want to ask you from a legal standpoint, there's been a big debate with a lot of social media platforms claiming they are not publishers, so they are not subject to the same laws of publishers, and interfering with this speech kind of muddies that line. So where do you stand on where that line should be, and how do they tread carefully not to cross it?
It's a great question. And truly, they're not a publisher in the traditional sense, right? They're not ABC News or the New York Times. They don't have to actually fact check everything that happens on their platform. But to claim that they're just a neutral platform is utter nonsense. Their algorithms curate the content. They decide what you see and what you don't see. They recommend groups to you. I know that Nick Clegg, the vice president, recently in his tour this week to explain how Facebook is doing, keeps saying they're a mirror to society. That implies that everything you see on Facebook is what you came to look for. But honestly, when you are like in a mom's group on Facebook and then an anti-vax ad is shown at you, that's not something that you are looking for necessarily. So to claim that they're just a neutral platform is also not accurate. They're curating your content. They're deciding what news you do and don't see. They're amplifying the most salacious content because that's what wins. People know that in order to keep us on your platform so that they can sell advertising, they have to really game the algorithms to get this real clickbaity, salacious content. So that's really, I know that was a lot, but there's really big issues that need to be handled. And right now they're just sort of tinkering at the margins of saying, well, we'll take down this group. And I do believe it's not good for their business to have white supremacists on their platforms. But it's also very different to say they will have a policy which will take these groups down and saying we'll change our algorithm so it no longer even recommends these groups. And that's some of the core. But also these policies that they haven't been applying them evenly. And this is why it's such a big thing. They did not apply these very same policies against the president of the United States of America. And that's where a lot of this current situation really bubbled up a few weeks ago.
All right, well, Yael, you say it's a lot, and it is for sure, but it sounds like we need a lot to examine this very large issue appropriately. We so appreciate your insight. Thank you for taking the time. And before we go tonight, we want to leave you with our image of the day. A look at how people and frogs are getting back to work. In Europe, there is Kermit the Frog spotted in one of Madrid's most popular parks, waiting for someone or something. Maybe the bus, maybe Miss Piggy. It's not easy being green. That is our image of the day, and that is our show for this hour. Stay tuned to ABC News Live for more context and analysis of the day's top stories. I'm Diane Macedo. Thanks for streaming with us, everybody. Stay safe.